All right, let's talk about methods. And before we do that, let's do a quick review of what is a function, right? Because you're going to see that functions and methods kind of overlap in some ways, right? So if you take a look on the screen, there's a quick example here of a function, right? We could create a function called draw stars, and we can specify what stars we want to draw, fill colors, the whole deal. And then the bottom line where it says draw stars, open and close parenthesis, is us calling on this function to run, right? So we can create a function, and then we can call a function, right, and ask it to do whatever the instructions are inside our function definition. So in a similar way, methods really do the exact same thing, except they happen instead of just happening to the whole program. It's a little mini program that we can run on everything. It's going to be tied to a specific shape, right? So methods are something that are done to objects, whereas functions are something that are done just within the entire program. So they're a lot more specific. For example, if we wanted to add a new point to a polygon, let's say we had a four-sided shape, and we wanted to make it a five-sided shape, we could call a method called addPoint, and that method's job would be to add a specific point to the shape, right, at a specific location, right? That's an object-specific thing because it's something that I would want to happen to polygons, but I would not necessarily want that to happen to, say, a circle, which does not have specific points. Okay, so they're going to be a little bit more specific to the object themselves. Okay, so here's a couple of things about methods. Okay, methods are called differently, right? If you remember when we went back to the functions, we created a function, and then when we called that function, we just used that name, right? So like, for example, our draw stars, we just wrote draw stars, open and close parenthesis, and that calls the draw stars function, okay? For methods, because it's happening on a specific object, we actually have to be specific and say, I want to do shape, whatever the object is that you're running it on. We're going to use what's called the dot command, right? We're just going to put a dot at the end of the shape name, and then we're going to specify what method we want to run, right? So any arguments that are within the parentheses, we would still include. So for example, if we had some object P, some polygon that maybe again had four sides and we wanted to add a point, we would call P dot add point, right? That's the name of the method. And then in the parentheses at the end, we would specify what point we wanted to add to the polygon, right? So it's doing the same thing. We're still using the function name add point. We're still specifying parameters in the parentheses, but instead of calling it independently, we're going to call it attached to an object with a dot. Okay, so methods are like properties in that some shapes will have certain ones that other ones do not have, right? Methods are object specific, right? And there might be some overlap where a bunch of different objects share a method, but they are not things that you can use all the time, okay? So what we're going to be doing in CMU to start is not necessarily writing our own methods like we did with some of the functions. We're just going to be using some methods that exist already within the CMU Academy framework, right? So here are some that we're going to start off by using. So the first one we've already talked about is called add point, right? Add point will add a point to a polygon, okay? It only works for polygons, right? If you created a, like a square, right? Or a rectangle, if you did RECT, right? And you tried to execute add point on that, it wouldn't work, right? You'd get an error message that says, this method does not work on this type of object. Sorry, that doesn't work, right? So make sure that you're only using add point on polygons, okay? We're going to use methods called toFront and toBack, okay? And these are methods that can be used on any shape, any object, right? It can be used on labels. It can be used on polygons. It can be used on rectangles or circles or ovals, right? Any object that you want, we can do toFront and toBack. And its job is going to be to move an object forward or backwards. So for example, if I drew a circle and then right on top of it, I drew a square, right? The square would cover part of the circle, right? What I can do then, because now the circle is kind of in the back, it's behind the square. What I can do is I can call circle.toFront, and that will pull the circle in front of the square, right? So it allows us to change which layer the different shapes are on, okay? App.stop is a method that is specific to the app object, right, which is the program, right, the overall program that we're running. And app.stop will tell the program, hey, we're done, stop running the program, right? So for example, if you built something into your program that says, press the X key to end the program, if the user presses the X key, you could call app.stop, and that would end the program, right? So these are the three that we're going to start with. Okay, and we're going to use them in specific cases. Okay, so we're not going to talk about object-oriented programming. Let's go to a specific example. Right, you can read this thing about object-oriented programming. That is something for a later date, though. So let's go to an example. Okay, so let's get rid of what's on the screen currently here. Okay, and what we're going to do is just kind of show quick examples of these three methods here: add point, to front, to back, and stop. Okay, so let's start off by creating a polygon. Okay, so I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it let's call it poly, right? Poly equals a polygon, okay? And we're going to have it go from 100, 100 to 300, 100 to 300, 300, and then back to, let's say 100, 300. Oh, other way around, 300, 100, okay? Let's see what that does, okay? So if I run this, where'd it go? Start typing. So poly equals polygon. That should work. Let's do this one to 300 as well, or to 200 maybe. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so we got this triangle. 100, 300, 300, 300. This one should be 100, 300. Let's try that. All right, there we go. I got my nice square. Okay, so I have this shape. Okay, and it's being stored in poly, right? My variable name. So if I want to use the add point method, what I can do is I can type in poly, which is the name of my object, dot add point. Okay. And then in the parentheses, I can specify what point I want to add. So for example, I can say, let's add one all the way over at 400, 200, for example, right? So that's going to be kind of over here, right? And if we see what we do, it adds it right there. Okay. So here's the thing you have to be careful about when you're using this function. Okay. It's going to add it to the end of the object. Okay. So you can see this does not look like a pentagon like we'd think. And the reason is that it went from 100 to 300 and then down to 300, 300, and then it came over here, and then from this point is where it's going to add the new one, which is why this point down here, 100, 300, is connected over here, right? So if I wanted this to operate in a different way, right, instead maybe what I would want to do is when I'm drawing it, say I could say I want it to kind of end maybe right here, so I just have to change the order of these points. So I might start off with, let's start off with 300, 300, okay. And then I'll go to 100, 300, okay, and then I'll go to 100, 100, and then I'll go to 300, 100, okay. Let's see what happens now, okay. So now you can see because my last point was 300, 100 up here, and then I added the point 400, 200, now it kind of looks like a pentagon, okay. So when you're using add point, order does matter, right? So you have to make sure that you're doing that correctly, okay. Just to kind of, again, give you an example, if I created something called circ, and I put in a circle, just at like, I don't know, we'll do it at like 0, 0, 50, right? And I created this circle kind of sitting up here. If I tried to do an add point to that, circ.add point, okay, and we'll do it at like 200, 200, right? Wherever we want to do it. Okay. If I do that, I get an error message because it's saying, oh, let's try and do it at the right spot, okay? If I try to run it now, it's trying to run it, and I'm not getting an error message, but it didn't do anything, right? There's no point that got added to my circ, right? The shape stayed the same because this method, add point, does not act upon the circle, right? So be careful about that, okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to keep this circle, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to move it to 200, 200, okay? Okay, so now I'm going to say I have a circle right in the middle here, okay? And let's make it red so we can actually see it. Fill equals red. Okay, I'm going to run it. There it is. Okay, so now I have a circle sitting on top of my my pentagon here that I created. Okay, so now what I can do, if I wanted to use two front and two back, is I can say, let's take poly, okay, and do a two back on it. I'm sorry, two front on it. Okay, and then what you're going to see is the circle is going to disappear. And the reason for this is we're going to take the polygon and we're going to move it to the front, right? So it's going to be in front of the red shape, right? And it goes away, right? And then if I did it again and I called poly, or I called circ two back, or maybe I'll do poly two back, right? It's going to go to the front and then come right to the back, and it's going to look like nothing happened, right? So that's all two front and two back do, okay? And then app.stop, I don't think I need to show you. That's something where we can just, if we write it, the program's going to end, right? So if I did app.stop, okay, just like that, right? the program just ends, right? It's our program's not really running anything anyway. Okay, so that's all methods are. Is they're going to be specific little mini programs that do a specific thing to a specific object. Okay, and again, the object might be just one thing, or it might be like a bunch of things, but it's something that's being executed on a specific object